What happens when the old ways are no longer the right ways? What happens when a myth is appended? When a beloved hero falls off their pedestal? And what is the true meaning of legacy and identity? These are all the ingredients that make up a great Star Wars film. And these are all the themes that make up The Last Jedi. Hi everyone! You've never seen me on here before, but my name is Suchi and welcome to my channel, where I talk about the stories that I love and that inspire me, as well as the stories that don't, but we'll get to that later. I've been meaning to do this video for a while now, and by a while I mean a year, but I'm here now and ready to present to you, the people, with a video that literally none of you asked for, but I'm gonna provide it anyway. The Last Jedi, written and directed by Rian Johnson, came out in 2017, and to put it mildly, caused quite a stir. So much so that while the critics on Rotten Tomatoes at the time gave it a certified fresh score of 93%, the audience score was far lower, at around 55%. And now, in the year of our Lord 2023, that gap between the critic score and the audience score has widened even further, with the critic score at 91% and the audience score in the low 40s. Now, I'm not insinuating that Rotten Tomatoes scores are the definitive ranking of film and television. I'm only saying that it is a widely referenced platform and is useful for generating a sense of what the audience, as well as a critic, thinks of a film, even if it isn't the majority. But I'll get to that in a second. So the film came out right around the December holiday season, which is generally a cheerful time of year, and there's generally a happy, festive mood in the atmosphere. So why were people so angered by The Last Jedi? Now, looking back, it's not that everyone universally hated the film, but there was a particular section of the Star Wars fandom that was so enraged by it that they were literally screaming about it wherever they could to anyone who cared to listen. Their hatred was so loud on so many social media platforms like Twitter and Reddit that it seemed to drown out much of the positive press and reviews the film was actually receiving. And even here on YouTube, a number of videos have been made completely dismantling the film and dismissing it as sacrilegious garbage. So, I recently decided to rewatch the Star Wars movies after many years, so I did, and I had a lot of fun. And once the ending credits of The Last Jedi were rolling, I sat there for a while and thought, wait, that was actually one of the better, if not the best, films of the bunch that I just watched. I think it was one of the few that made me feel something. Like it gave me something to think about long after it was over, in a way that only a few of the other Star Wars films did. And even then, The Last Jedi feels separate from the rest, like it was meant for a different, more introspective audience than the traditional blockbuster films are made for. Now, do I think it's a perfect film? No. There were some instances where the pacing felt a bit off for me, and there were definitely moments where I felt could have expanded upon, but overall I think the film accomplishes a lot in its given runtime. I remembered feeling similarly when I walked out of the theater after having first watched this back in 2017. But now, almost 6 years later, there's been a lot of discussion recently around this film and its larger themes. It's trending pretty much every week on Twitter, and many people are returning to it, rewatching it to give it another look, and rethinking their earlier stances on it. And of course, all the while, people are reigniting the old discourse of whether Rian Johnson is a filmmaking genius, or if he single-handedly attempted to burn down the Star Wars IP and ruined it for the real fans. So I thought it would be fun to break down The Last Jedi, examine some of the main criticism it's received, and explore what makes this film so different from the other Star Wars media that we've gotten over the years. Now, before I continue on, I want to take a moment to address the bantha in the room. Racism definitely played a part in the backlash this film got, and the backlash against the sequel trilogy as a whole. I guess watching people of color play lead roles in Star Wars made people more uncomfortable than having to set eyes on this thing for some reason. But I personally don't care how an Asian woman playing a resistance hero, or a black stormtrooper, or a hotshot Latino pilot made unwashed bros on the internet mad. I just don't. It's such a dumb reason for disliking a piece of media. Like, if your main problem with a film is seeing people who don't look like you on screen, then maybe you should examine why that is. And also, you should stop critiquing films. Because racism is not a valid criticism of a media work, and never will be. Moving on. The The Last Jedi picks up right where The Force Awakens ends. The film opens with its traditional screen crawl, explaining all that has happened since the events of Episode 7, which has been exactly 2 days. Regardless, an important development has taken place in that short time, and it's that the despotic regime of the First Order, still reeling from their loss of Starkiller Base, has decided to be as ruthless as ever and is further cracking down on their reign of terror in the galaxy. Determined to root out the resistance once and for all, the First Orders come up with the technology to track them through hyperspace, meaning that no matter where our heroes try to escape to, they will always have the First Order right behind them. Getting Luke Skywalker back is their only hope to win against them. He's been missing for years, but now that Rey has the map to his location, General Leia has a fighting chance of getting her brother back and saving the Resistance from destruction at the hands of Snoke's Empire. I think the anticipation, okay, I'll see myself out after this video is over. I think the anticipation prior to this film releasing was at an all-time high. The Force Awakens had an extremely open cliffhanger ending and introduced a whole host of new characters and raised questions that didn't end up getting answered, but would hopefully be addressed later on in the sequel trilogy. Again, or so people hoped. There were 2 whole years between releases of The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi, so there were all sorts of plot rumors and fan theories floating around the internet that had the time to sort of marinate in people's collective consciousness. So much so that those theories became canon in their minds, or fanon, if you will. Basically, this idea that if the film doesn't go exactly the way I've been cooking up in my head over the last 2 years, it's garbage. It's trash. It's going to be trash, and I'm going to hate it if it doesn't go exactly the way I pictured it in my head. I want to take a moment here and point out that in the gap between 2015 and 2017, when The Last Jedi came out, there were pretty much no plot details released, either unofficially or officially. There were no Reddit leaks, at least to my knowledge, and no German Burger King commercials relaying the entire premise and climax of the film to unsuspecting viewers. If you know, you know. You know what? Maybe in that specific scenario it was good. They were trying to warn us. It was all right there, hidden in those Whoppers, lost in the sauce. Anyway, what I'm trying to say here is that because there was so little information out there on where this story would go next, certain theories became so cemented in people's minds, and when The Last Jedi didn't end up going in that direction, it made them a little bit upset. That's one of the main criticisms that this movie got, that it didn't respect any of the fan theories that were swirling about the internet, that it wrongly subverted fan expectations. But that's not really true. One of the biggest questions following The Force Awakens was, who are Rey's parents? Rey, this girl plucked out of her harsh and lonely existence on a nowhere sand planet, who carried a powerful connection to the Force, had to have powerful parents. Her strength in the Force and ultimately her significance and reason for being in the story is clearly due to her parentage. She has to be an Nepo baby. She just has to be. She can't just be a nobody from the desert, because Luke Skywalker also came from a nowhere sand planet, and he ended up being somebody important, and it's because he descended from somebody important. Or excuse me, 2 important somebodies. In this house, Padme Amidala is queen, okay? But The Last Jedi does away with this theory. Rey's parents are revealed to be nobodies. They were random people selling junk in a barren wasteland and abandoned her as a child. Rey is nobody from nowhere, and that's honestly incredible. Because you don't need to be related to someone special to be special. Talent can come from anywhere and always has. It's really that simple. Having the main female protagonist be a literal nobody allows the focus to be solely on her and her arc. By not being related to any existing character, it allows her own growth to be entirely organic and self-sustained. And frankly, Rey didn't need to have any significant parentage because Ben Solo was literally right there. Like a whole child of legacy characters right there. We'll get to that later. So yes, The Last Jedi did debunk a few popular fan theories, but debunking fan theories isn't the same as disrespecting fans, especially when the route the film ultimately chooses allows fans to relate to these characters a lot better. But there were some fan theories that were simply too powerful for The Last Jedi to fully dismiss. They were just too rooted in the Star Wars lore for Rian Johnson to ignore. Oh, that rhymed. And that was the Force bond between Rey and Kylo Ren. When I first saw this in the theater, I was literally floored. Like, my jaw was on the floor. I sat there frozen in my seat and watched it all unfold in this stunned silence. In the theater, too, it was just like you could hear a pin drop in that first scene. Nobody was even breathing because they were just as shook as I was. The Force bond is basically a mystical connection between two powerful Force users that allows them to see and touch each other and even feel each other's thoughts and emotions from extremely far away, like whole star systems away. It was definitely one of the more out there theories, especially because it was popularized by, you guessed it, the Reylos. But the Reylos could never be right. Rey and Kylo Ren, two foes on opposite sides of the war. There was no way they would ever come together. And not like that. It's just a crack shit made up by insane fangirls who love broody, pasty, dark-haired crybabies and will ship Rey with Kylo whether it makes sense thematically or not. And so the Force bond theory spread throughout the fandom, first by Reylos in their AO3 fanfics as a way to get Kylo Ren and Rey to know each other better in wildly inconvenient and frankly hilarious circumstances. Because the Force bond worked at random and they could materialize in front of each other no matter where they were or what they were doing. And then The Last Jedi came out, and that's exactly how things played out. I enjoy this particular theory mostly because the idea of randomly appearing in front of the person you love to hate and also having your whole self on display to them at wildly inconvenient times is just extremely funny to me. But I didn't think it would actually become canon. It was such a bonkers concept, you know? Like, it was so camp. And Star Wars films usually aren't camp. Aside from, again, Padme Amidala and her wardrobe. I was fully camp, like slay. So I walked into that theater expecting there to be no Force bond and no camp and no ensuing shenanigans from it. The vindication I got in that moment, unmatched. The Force bond ended up being a great way to bring Rey and Ben together on screen. Who would have guessed? This weird and inconvenient bond forced them to face each other and actually form an understanding between them, and it also made them come to terms with who they are in relation to each other. I'll save this for another video, but the dynamic between Rey and Ben Solo has been recognized as the heart of the trilogy by many critics, and their whole relationship arc from how it starts to the infinite potentials of where it can go is probably one of the most interesting things Star Wars has ever done. And it's here in The Last Jedi where these two antagonists actually start to make a connection and really see each other for who they are on a deeper level. Also, side note, this was honestly one of the coolest scenes Star Wars has ever given us. Change my mind. Anyway, back to my main point. This film isn't afraid to get introspective, because these meetings through the Force bond aren't actually happening in real space. They're happening in some sort of metaphysical plane that only Rey and Kylo can reach. And so we see the film trying to capture that feeling. From the sweeping music to the wide shots of scenery of the sparsely inhabited islands and the oceanic landscape of this strange new world that Rey has found herself in. The tone feels very atmospheric and gets almost dreamlike at some points. It feels very meditative and mystical and is trying to get both the audience as well as the two characters to look inward. Another point of criticism this film gets is that it botched Luke Skywalker's whole character arc. Luke is now a figure of legend within the Star Wars canon. So big a legend that he's become more myth than man, and his name is known even in the furthest corners of the galaxy. People hated that Luke is taken from this pure-hearted, truly good person and is made into this curmudgeonly old man who's lost all hope. But nobody stays 19 and fresh-faced forever. People grow up, they make mistakes, and sometimes they make terrible ones. That's just life, y'all. It's just like that sometimes. It's revealed in the film that Luke was the one that sort of hit the final nail on the coffin of Ben Solo turning into Kylo Ren. Luke was afraid of Ben's growing powers and his affiliation to the dark side, and in a brief moment of weakness, of succumbing to his own darkness, he stands there and contemplates ending Kylo Ren before he begins, by killing Ben Solo, his literal nephew. Now, this particular narrative decision really made people mad, and understandably so. It's not easy to imagine the Luke Skywalker of the original trilogy considering murdering his own nephew, not when he refused to kill his own father, Darth Vader. who had committed a laundry list of war crimes by the time they ever crossed lightsabers. In the flashback we get in The Last Jedi, we see a man who, in that moment of weakness, gave into fear because he'd seen the darkness surrounding his nephew and the destruction he will cause. We are no longer seeing a myth or a legend on the screen. We just see a man who was afraid and who made a big mistake because of it. But it's important to note here that Luke didn't lose what made him Luke in the first place. In the end, he didn't act upon his fears and skewer Ben that night. He did not, in fact, choose violence. But of course, by then, it was too late. Ben had woken up, saw his uncle standing over him, looking like he's about to murder him, and the damage was done. And Ben ends up fighting back and turning to the dark side and to the First Order. Again, I'll probably do a whole separate video on Ben Solo's arc because I just think there's so much to unpack there, but I will say that his turn to the dark side only makes sense if someone very close to him was the catalyst for it. It'd be much harder to believe that he would leave his family behind and become this galactic terrorist if his family was innocent in this whole affair. Making Luke partially responsible for Ben turning into Kylo Ren at least cements the recurring theme throughout the Star Wars films that the Skywalkers live for drama and that the galaxy is probably better off without them. I'm kidding, okay? Mostly. Those Chanel boots could never be a crime. And Ben Solo is actually my baby boy. We'll get to that another day. Luke Skywalker has, for decades now, represented hope. But sometimes people lose hope, either in themselves or in others, or both. But that doesn't mean it's lost forever, and that it can never be found again. And that doesn't end up playing out in The Last Jedi either. In the beginning of the film, we see a dejected old man who has cut himself off from his family and the Force. We see a man whose crushing guilt over his own failures is keeping him away from the people he loves. But The Last Jedi is, at its core, a film about choices. It's the idea that hope for a better world, for a better future, is a choice that we make. That's how we find hope, and by extension, the light. By choosing the path of saving what can be saved instead of giving up and giving in to the darkest parts of ourselves. We see Luke make that choice after his old Master Yoda appears and gives him a much-needed pep talk. Like, yeah, you messed up, but you can always choose to grow beyond your mistakes. You can always choose to make things right. And that's exactly what Luke does. He ends up using his remaining life force to face the First Order, apologize to Ben, and help Leia and the Resistance escape. And he's a hero once again. Hi, it's Suchi from the future. I'm re-recording this part because my camera's battery died when I originally said this piece, but I really want to include this in the video, so here we are. I feel like a lot of major films and TV shows of late have been kind of ending on a cynical or pessimistic note, or extremely pessimistic depending on the work in question. I'll insert some great examples here. And it's definitely a pattern that's noticed by the audience. I remember exactly 2 years after The Last Jedi came out, the hashtag #ThankYouRianJohnson blew up on Twitter. Basically, it was in support of The Last Jedi and everything he had done to contribute to the Star Wars canon by making that film. And fans were doing this because they had just come out of seeing that film that must not be named, and realize that pessimism and bleakness have no place in Star Wars. Or at least that should not be how the story ends. So he saw the hashtag and he responded with this. King shit. You knew exactly what he was talking about and alluding to there on December 24th, 2019. And that's exactly why the scene in The Last Jedi is so important.
I held out hope for so long, but I know my son's gone. No one's ever really gone.
Because Luke, the character, is rejecting his inner demons as well as Leia's. He's looking cynicism in the eye and telling his sister that no one is ever really gone. That despite everything, people can come back and rise again for the better. And that's the story right there. That's Star Wars. We saw it happen with Anakin, we see it with Luke in this film, and now we're seeing the same setup for Ben Solo, for Rey, for Finn, Poe, Rose, whoever feels lost and dejected and wants to come home to belonging and love. The Last Jedi's ending is hopeful to a radical degree, and that's what makes it such a great jump-off point to finish out the sequel trilogy with a satisfying and thrilling and inspiring conclusion. Back to the main video. The choices we make and the gravity of our decisions is a central theme to this film, and of Star Wars as a whole, but especially this film. I think Finn's character arc is a great example of this. He started out in The Force Awakens as a stormtrooper who defected from his former regime and just wanted to run away, to disappear. And he starts out this film essentially wanting to do the same thing. Except he's bringing Rey with him this time, and he wants them both to be out of there quicker than you can say bantha poo. And he's doing this because he sees no hope for the Resistance. Because the First Order now has the ability to track them through hyperspace, so they're pretty much cornered and have nowhere to hide. But then he meets Rose, a nobody mechanic whose sister we see giving her life in order to save the Resistance earlier on in the film. Rose initially thinks Finn is deserting the Resistance, which he is. But once he explains that they can't run away without being hunted down by their foes, she thinks there might actually be a way to disable the First Order's tracking devices, and Finn ultimately decides to stay. He still could have run away, but instead he and Rose, along with Poe's help, go off on a mission to a fancy casino planet to try and get the help of a master codebreaker who can sneak them onto the First Order ship and disable the tracker. This way the Resistance can escape. So Finn and Rose land on this obscenely wealthy world, which incidentally looks like Positano in space. Side note, I love when Star Wars recreates Italy in space. The aesthetic always slays, like look at Naboo. Absolutely stunning, gorgeous, like give us more of these beautiful worlds where we can eat space pasta and drink space bellinis instead of desert and more desert. People argue that this scene kind of takes us out of the film and that it's distracting the audience from the rest of the action and that it doesn't fit within the overall story. I think the scene does have a purpose, which is to expand the world that we're seeing on screen and give us a look into something that's not really explored by Star Wars before this film, which is the corrupt society that directly feeds off the war and profits off of exploitation. Here, Finn, and the audience by extension, is directly exposed to the dark underbelly of the First Order, which, as Rose explains, is sustained by slave labor. Now it dawns on Finn that this conflict is much bigger than himself. He's realizing that heroism isn't simply joining the Resistance and looking cool while firing blasters at stormtroopers. It's about lifting the downtrodden up and the oppressed out of tyranny and leading them to freedom. He has seen entire planets get vaporized from existence before, but that was always from far away. This is the first time he's seeing the effect of the First Order up close and personal. That's why this scene matters. That's why he chooses to stay and fight. The weight of our choices is a theme prevalent across virtually every character in The Last Jedi, and it's used as a device to show how each character changes throughout the course of the film. In the beginning of the film, our favorite flyboy Poe makes a rash decision that ends up losing the entire Resistance bombing fleet, despite the mission ending up being successful. But like Finn, he too eventually realizes that heroism isn't about how many bad guys you shot down, it's about how many lives you can save. And Rose, I absolutely loved her by the way. Kelly Marie Tran slayed, she ate and left no crumbs. Rose understands this, and she makes that choice too. She doesn't let Finn sacrifice himself for the Resistance. Because she watched her sister do the same thing and decided that it's more important to try and live to see another day. To survive so that you can fight smarter. That's how you win the war in the end. It's interesting to see how certain character choices have this kind of domino effect in the film. Like each decision opens up a chain of subsequent events. Kylo Ren chooses not to shoot his mother Leia when he has the chance. She gets blasted into space anyway, but it was cool to see her use her force powers. Kylo instead spares his mother, which is yet another catalyst pushing him towards the light. He chooses to kill his former master when he's made to kill Rey, and Rey herself chose to try and bring Ben Solo back to the light instead of staying and learning from Luke. But in the end, Rey learns that you can never make people's decisions for them. Ben doesn't end up going with her, but instead asks her to join him and rule the galaxy in the worst marriage proposal the universe has seen since Mr. Darcy first popped the question to Lizzie Bennet. In both cases, the men were shut down real fast.
From the very beginning, your manners impressed me with the fullest belief of your arrogance, your conceit, and your selfish disdain for the feelings of others. I had not known you a month before I felt you were the last man in the world whom I could ever marry.
Real fast. As they should be. Again, I love both my boys, but they were really in their idiotic eras then. They'll learn. Part of what makes this film unique is its themes of legacy and how we grow from the past. For some characters, like Luke and Ben, legacy is a heavy burden that must be shed in order to move on and find some semblance of peace. The past is something that must be let go and must be replaced with something new. But letting go of the past doesn't mean we forget it, and it doesn't mean we can't learn from it. And that's what Ben did not yet understand there at the end of The Last Jedi. But now the stage is set for him to come to terms with himself in the future. The stage is set for him to complete his story arc and become a hero himself in the end. And Luke finds peace after facing his past as well. And because of him and Poe, Finn, Rose, and Rey, against all odds, the Resistance lives to see another day. And hope lives on, in the galaxy and in us, the audience, as well. And that, guys, is The Last Jedi. I just wish it got a sequel. Guys, thank you so much for watching me ramble about this movie for the better part of an hour. If you managed to sit through this entire thing, you're a real one and you deserve a cookie. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Whether you agree with me or not, I'd love to hear them. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.